It's very likely that over the last couple of years, you've noticed that quite literally everything has gone up in price. Whether you're buying bread at the grocery store or you're replacing your broken down, beat up car, your dollar doesn't quite go as far as it used to. In fact, in conversation with pretty much anybody, it's very likely that the cost of living is going to come up, and everyone is going to lament at just how expensive it is to simply survive now. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing why the cost of living has increased so much and how it is, without question, one of the greatest threats to your personal financial security. Let's get started. First, let's establish that what we're talking about today is an incredibly complex topic, and my goal as an educator is to establish from a first principles perspective how inflation is happening, how the cost of living is increasing, and how we can curb it moving forward. This is one of those things that is impacting billions of people around the world. It is something that has tremendous impact on the financial security of people all across the world. And although governments are doing their best to curb inflation, to curb the cost of living, and there have been some minor victories, the battle is still ongoing. The increase to the cost of living has been caused by a number of things, but the primary factor is inflation. Inflation is defined as the decline of purchasing power of a currency over time, which is often illustrated by the cost of goods increasing as the purchasing power of the currency decreases. This is estimated by using a variety of measures, one of which is known as the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index utilizes something called the basket of goods, which is essentially like, if you can visualize, getting a basket and putting everything you need to survive in it. That includes energy, like fuel and electricity. It also includes housing and, of course, food. And what you do is you use that metric to determine how much it costs to survive. And you compare this metric to what it used to cost prior. And you can get an indication of how inflation is impacting the kind of standard of life or the cost of living of a given person in a given region, because if it is constantly increasing, it is costing more and more to maintain that standard of living. When you compare this metric to years prior, you start to see an upward trend, which is exactly what inflation is, the cost of that bucket of goods increasing over time. Let's take a more detailed look. Alright, so I believe that one of the best ways to understand how the cost of living increases and inflation are impacting your finances is to look at real world data. And this is some data provided directly from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's basically up to date as per recording here. So this is comparing the cost of living, the Consumer Price Index, from February 2021 to February 2022. And let's take a look. So basically all items, you're looking at an inflation rate of 7.9%. That means that everything is 7.9% more expensive than it was the prior year, if you take that into consideration. Food itself is 7.9%, ironically identical to that. Energy up 25.6%. That is absolutely insane. So this is electricity, this is gas, fuel, all those things. That is huge. That is absolutely insane. And that's having a major impact on people's ability to financially sustain themselves. And then all items other than food and energy, you're looking at 6.4%. What's interesting about this is that it kind of hides some information here. So if we click on all energy, so you talk about commodities, for instance, take a look at some of the things that have increased in price, right? So you have clothes, 6.6%, new vehicles, 12.4%. But look at this, used cars, 41%. Can you believe that cars are up 41%? A used car is up 41%. That's insane. So this is kind of having a very interesting impact, because if you need to replace your vehicle and you can't afford a new car, which has already increased in price, the used cars, which used to be kind of affordable, are now like 41% more expensive, which is insane. Actually, literally, I saw a minivan that was like 3 years old, used. It's like a Toyota minivan, $50,000. Canadian, but $50,000. I'm not paying $50,000 for a used minivan. What is happening here? But this is what's happening, right? An incredible increase of the cost of living. So if you actually take a look at the Consumer Price Index and specifically the increase of things, you're going to notice a couple major things here. Now I want to talk about this quickly. Again, this is United States facts and numbers. So basically, inflation generally is like a couple percent a year. 2%, 3%, blah, blah, blah. You kind of expect that, right? What happened here? Inflation kind of jumped up in 2008. What happened in 2008? Financial crisis in 2008. And what happened? Boom! Markets got destroyed. Okay? I mean, we corrected inflation, but markets got destroyed. What's happening here? Little fluctuations here and there, nothing crazy. Okay? December. And then we got 2020. What happened in 2020? COVID. Boom, everything goes down. And now what's happening? Insane inflation. Because of what happened with COVID, we were responsible for printing lots of money. Governments printed lots of money. The pandemic had a major impact on businesses, on people. They printed lots of money. And take a look at this, 7.9%. In fact, inflation is absolutely out of control. The highest since 1982 from what I understand. So you're looking at an insane run here of inflation. But take a look, if you're, interested in stock market and stuff. What happened last time? Boom. What's going to happen on this side? Boom. Who knows, right? No one has a magic 8-ball that can tell the future, but this is pretty sus to say the least. So this is another website that I think is really valuable in breaking down exactly what we just spoke about in very plain terms. So this is from the Bank of Canada. It's an inflation calculator. And what's really interesting about it is it really makes it relatively simple to understand. So you have $1,000 and you had $1,000 in 2019. How much would that be worth today in 2022? I want you to think in your head. That's only 3 years ago. $1,000. How much, would that basket of goods cost you 3 years later? Let's calculate it. Boom. It would cost you $91.45 more this year. Isn't that insane? $91? That's like an extra grocery trip for some people, for some families. Literally, $91 more. That's an inflation rate of 14%, in 3 years. You start to see the problem in very simple terms, okay? That's just we're using $1,000. What if you have $50,000 of savings in your bank account and it's just sitting there and you haven't put them into any assets like ETFs or stocks or bonds or anything? That money just lost 9%. It lost 9% of its value because it's sitting there in cash, right? Cash is trash. That's what they say, right? But anyways, this is the reality that we're facing. And inflation has always been a factor. Like we cut this back to 2000, what the last 22 years look like. Right? $1,000, it would cost you to buy those same goods $1,560. So inflation is always a factor. But what is completely unnerving is the rate of inflation that we're experiencing over these last few years. The rate of inflation is creating a situation where the cost of living is extremely challenging. And that's what we're talking about today. But Alex, how did this happen? Why is our currency being devalued at such an alarming rate? Well, like all things in finance, it's complicated. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to help you to understand by breaking down 4 primary things that are generally impacting inflation. The first and second factor for inflation are actually heavily correlated. The first being supply chain disruption. When supply chains are disrupted, whether that be from the factory to the consumer or for components required to build the item at the factory to then deliver to the consumer, that can have tremendous impacts on the cost or the production schedule of that item. The result is that you're going to see an increased cost to the consumer. Let's take the car industry, for example. So there's a couple things we need to know about the car industry. The first is that, first of all, it's like a worldwide industry. You build one car in the United States, but you're getting parts from China, you're getting parts from India, you're getting parts from all over the world. They get shipped in and then they're brought together in one plant and then the car is built in the United States. But you're not just using all the components in the States, it's a worldwide economy. It's a worldwide effort. And even one component, one shortfall, which in the past was silicon, one shortfall is going to slow down that production. Let alone, this is a whole other video we need to talk about, but that we also do something called just-in-time production, where we just produce things just as we need them, which has caused this windfall of production challenges. But regardless, again, that's a discussion for another day. But long story short, supply chain challenges can have a huge impact on the consumer because that cost is passed on to them, which is essentially what the second cost of inflation is. The second cause of inflation is an increase in production costs, because as the cost of production increases, companies aren't just going to be like, well, we're making less money now. All they're going to do is just increase the cost of the end product, which is going to be put onto the consumer itself. A lot of these companies are publicly traded. They don't want to take massive losses just because the production is getting more expensive. You're paying more, not them. And that is another factor in inflation. The third cause for inflation is the increase of energy costs. Now, this is one that I feel like a lot of people misunderstand. I actually did a full video on why gas and oil is going to be increasing in price over the next decade. I'll link it above. It's really interesting, a complete deep dive. But basically, a lot of people really understand that, okay, so if gas goes up in price, that means I'm going to be spending more money to fill my tank, which means I have less disposable income to spend on other things, and also less income to spend on housing and food and things along those lines. So that is a form of inflation. But what a lot of people often fail to realize is just how much of an impact energy can have on other elements of the consumer price index, namely food production. As one might expect, a major component of the consumer price index is food. Well, it's obvious. We need food to survive. But what's not obvious is that the agricultural industry is one of the biggest utilizers of fuel. So when fuel prices skyrocket, so does the price of food. Food production also increases as well. And that can put incredible strain on families, on people, on the cost of living. And you've all seen this. The price of food has skyrocketed over the last few years. It's absolutely insane. I remember going to grocery stores and be able to get things regularly on sale. But like even a box of Cheerios feels like it's several dollars more expensive than it was 3 years ago. It's insane. And this is a part of the cost of living. It's increasing and you're getting nickeled and dimed over and over and over again at the gas tank, at the supermarket, right? Your housing costs, and it's all adding up to making things extremely difficult to afford. And that is why this is a major crisis. It is a major stress financially on many people. It is one of the greatest threats to people's financial futures. The increase of fuel, the increase of food, the increase of housing, these are all things that you cannot control inherently, but you have to deal with financially, and this can be an incredible challenge. The fourth major cause of inflation is the devaluation of a currency because of an increased supply. Now, this is such a complex topic and one that I'll actually go deep into in another video. However, for the purpose of this video, let's have a good conversation about it. Essentially, if you are a country and your federal bank or Federal Reserve or central bank is basically the best business in the entire world. Why? Because if you need more money, you just print it. And that's what they've been doing for years now. They've been printing money like crazy. And the result is a devalued currency because the more money that's in circulation, the less each individual unit is worth. All right, so I can't wait to show you this because we were talking about how inflation is a major issue and how countries can just print unlimited amounts of money. So let's take a look at fiat market cap. Now, fiat currencies are currencies by decree, meaning that the government says that this is a currency of this nation and it has value here because we say so. So let's take a look. You have, right, China, you got the US dollar, the big US dollar, right? Second place to China. You have the euro. And what you're noticing here, the max supply is unlimited. They're all unlimited, but there's a surprise. There's a surprise, not the Canadian one. Trust me, from personal experience, I'll tell you, they've been printing money like crazy. They're all unlimited, except one. What could it possibly be? Look at that. It's Bitcoin. That's right, it's Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a limited supply of 21 million coins, which is interesting because it is literally the only asset on this chart that has a limited max value. I actually have a crypto channel, by the way. I'll link it down below. But anyways, it's interesting, isn't it? That every single country has max unlimited supply. They can print as much money as they want. No wonder inflation's a problem, right? No wonder inflation and the cost of living has increased so much because we can just print as much money as we need. These governments and their federal reserves, they can just print as much money as they need. The only exception is Bitcoin right now. Bitcoin, the only one on this list where it has a limited amount of, obviously Bitcoin has its own problems, right? There's, that's a whole other conversation for another day, another channel. But long story short, this is what inflation looks like. This is why we're in this situation, because these countries and their governments can print money all they want. Central banks printing limitless amounts of money kind of was showcased during the pandemic, where governments had to respond rather rapidly to the lockdowns and the closures and the impacts of the COVID-19 virus. This was unprecedented, and governments were unable to predict or essentially react in a way that they could kind of understand how they were going to impact the future economy. So what they were doing is they were being very reactive, and the way they did that was, they did their best to support people by printing more money and providing financing to people and businesses that were struggling, which realistically was what they had to do. It was a situation where they said, let's print money now, we'll deal with the repercussions later because these people need help, and well, now we're dealing with the repercussions. And it's complicated because what you're seeing is a major devaluation of currency and a massive amount of inflation ever since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. All right, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Alex, listen, the United States is huge, Canada's huge, Germany's huge. What's it matter if you print a little bit of money? It doesn't really make that much of a difference. Well, let's talk about it, okay? Let's say you print an extra $1,000 from your Federal Reserve and you give it to a guy and he's like, all right, I'm going to Costco to buy some stuff. He buys with $1,000, he buys a bunch of food stuff that he needs, and he also buys, a bunch of toilet paper because that's apparently what you want to buy. And he buys an Xbox too. He's like, you know what, I'm going to buy an Xbox because, with the lockdown, I want to be entertained. I got the new Xbox Series X. It's going to be a good time, right? That's good. Did it impact the overall economy? Not really. You would probably never notice it. Even if you tried hard, you probably would have known that the federal bank released $1,000 to one guy. But that's not how it works. This is economy of scale. What actually happens is the government prints trillions of dollars to give thousands of dollars to millions of people. And what happens is all these people, they go to that Costco. And what they do is they buy a bunch of food, they buy a ton of toilet paper, and the toilet paper runs out. And they're like, what's happening here? Costco's like, whoa, where do all these people get this money? We're gonna have to bring up the cost of toilet paper because the factory can't keep up. And then people start hoarding toilet paper. The cost of toilet paper increases. People are using this extra money that they have to spend more on consumer goods. The companies say, hey, we can make more money. They raise the price of the consumer goods. People are buying all these Xboxes. The Xboxes can't stay on the shelves. So then people get bots to buy out the Xboxes to then scalp them later. Oh my gosh, you guys know where I'm going with this. Long story short, when you create a massive influx of additional currency into a market, history has shown over and over and over again, the price of things increase. The value of the dollar decreases. If more people have money, you can charge more for something. More people are purchasing. In some ways, this can stimulate the economy. It can generate some tax revenue, but what's that worth if you've devalued your currency, right? Again, this is an incredibly complex situation. It goes well beyond the idea or the concept of hoarding toilet paper. I know I'm making light of a very complex and serious discussion here, but really, like, this is kind of what happened, right? And it is something we'll discuss in future videos, but it is incredibly complex. And this is something that we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, where just a metric ton, not even a metric ton, way more than that amount of currency was printed in all countries around the world to deal with the devastating effects of the lockdowns and the pandemic. And we are just beginning to understand the repercussions of it. So where do we go from here? Well, governments have been doing their best they can to kind of curb this a little bit. I mean, housing has been a major factor. We barely touched on this video, but housing is absolutely out of control in most areas of the world, including Canada, the United States. So governments have been increasing interest rates, which have curbed the rate of growth in the housing market to try and make it a little more affordable, but it's still largely unaffordable. The vast majority of people find housing completely financially inaccessible, which is a huge problem because, once again, it's one of the core staples of the consumer price index. It is absolutely required. You need to live somewhere. You need shelter. And if that's too expensive, that is a major factor. But governments are beginning to try to curb inflation. They're increasing interest rates. They're doing things to curb inflation. We're only starting to see the impacts of it. We'll do a future video again where we explore how these impacts have kind of played out. But at the end of the day, they're doing the best they can. And all we can do is try our best to manage with what we have. If you're interested in learning more, I really suggest that you watch this next video, which I think is super informative and a lot of fun. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.